In the 21st century, the word Versailles evokes unparalleled opulence. Gilded gates reflecting morning sun, 357 mirrors casting infinite reflections down a 73-meter gallery, and meticulously manicured gardens stretching toward the horizon. The palace stands as humanity's most magnificent monument to absolute power, drawing millions of visitors who gasp at its perfect proportions and flawless preservation. However, there was a time when this architectural masterpiece teetered on the brink of oblivion, its roofs pierced by rain, its priceless paintings warping from moisture, and its marble crumbling beneath visitors' feet. In the aftermath of World War I, a financially devastated France watched helplessly as the Sun King's greatest achievement deteriorated beyond repair, until an unexpected American savior arrived with a checkbook and a vision that transcended national boundaries. In today's episode of Old Money Mansions, we reveal how oil magnate John D. Rockefeller Jr. launched history's most consequential private restoration campaign, transforming not just wood and stone, but our entire approach to preserving civilization's greatest treasures. If you're lucky enough to visit the Palace of Versailles these days, you'd first be greeted by the gleaming gilded gates of the royal court that would immediately signal your arrival at one of humanity's most magnificent architectural achievements. The morning sunlight would reflect brilliantly off the meticulously restored gold leaf adorning the entrance, a testament to centuries of painstaking preservation efforts. Joining the crowds of visitors from around the world, you'd make your way through security and enter the marble courtyard, where the scale of Louis XIV's vision would begin to unfold before you. The palace facade would stretch impressively before your eyes, its symmetrical windows and classical details creating a harmonious composition that exemplifies French Baroque architecture at its finest. Entering the palace interior, your first stop would likely be the magnificent royal chapel, its soaring ceiling adorned with paintings celebrating the divine right of kings, recently restored to its original splendor through Swiss philanthropic efforts. Moving through the royal apartments, you'd witness room after room of opulent decoration, gilded moldings, crystal chandeliers, and silk-covered walls, each space more impressive than the last. The true highlight would await in the Hall of Mirrors, where 357 mirrors would reflect the light streaming through 17 tall windows, creating a dazzling play of illumination across the 73-meter gallery. Standing in this legendary space, where the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, you'd almost hear the echoes of diplomatic negotiations and royal celebrations that have occurred here over the centuries. The King's and Queen's state apartments would offer intimate glimpses into royal life, with Marie Antoinette's chambers particularly evocative of the final days before the French Revolution swept away the monarchy. Beyond the palace walls, you'd discover the gardens designed by André Le Nôtre, unfolding in geometric perfection, a masterpiece of landscape architecture covering nearly 2,000 acres. The Grand Canal would stretch to the horizon, while meticulously manicured parterres would showcase seasonal plantings that maintain the garden's historical accuracy. Marble statues and elaborate fountains would dot the landscape, with the famous musical fountain show operating on weekends to delight visitors with choreographed water displays set to classical music. Further exploration would reveal the Grand Trianon and Petit Trianon, smaller palaces where royalty escaped the formality of court life. Marie Antoinette's rustic hamlet would provide a charming contrast to the grandeur elsewhere, with its thatched roof cottages and working farm reflecting the Queen's desire for a simpler existence. Modern amenities sensitively integrated throughout the estate, digital information kiosks, accessible pathways, and discrete climate control systems would ensure the palace remains both historically authentic and welcoming to contemporary visitors. The careful balance between historical preservation and modern tourism would be evident everywhere, from the expertly guided tours to the thoughtfully designed museum spaces that house the palace's vast collections. As you'd conclude your visit, perhaps stopping at one of the elegant cafes on the grounds, you might reflect on how extraordinary it is that this pinnacle of royal extravagance has been so perfectly preserved for public enjoyment. Yet the splendor you'd witness today almost vanished forever, for behind Versailles' current magnificence lies a dramatic story of ambitious construction, political upheaval, and near destruction. A tale that begins with a modest hunting lodge and a king's extraordinary vision. The magnificent palace that dazzles millions of visitors today began as a humble hunting lodge built by Louis XIII in 1623, nestled in the countryside west of Paris. This modest structure would soon become the canvas for his son's grand ambitions. When Louis XIV ascended to the throne in 1643, he harbored traumatic memories of the Fronde rebellions that had once forced him to flee Paris as a child. The Sun King envisioned a palace that would not only distance him from the volatile Parisian populace, but also physically embody the absolute power of the French monarchy. In 1661, Louis XIV commissioned architect Louis Levaux to begin expanding his father's hunting lodge, marking the first of several major building campaigns that would transform the site over the next 5 decades. André Le Nôtre, the royal gardener, began the monumental task of reshaping the marshy terrain into formal gardens with geometric precision, a project that would ultimately involve moving entire hillsides, creating a grand canal, and engineering an elaborate hydraulic system to power numerous fountains. By 1668, the first significant expansion was complete, but Louis was only getting started. The second building campaign, beginning in 1669, saw the construction of the envelope that would wrap around the original hunting lodge, dramatically expanding the palace footprint and creating the distinctive U-shaped layout visible today. Thousands of workers labored on the site, employing traditional techniques alongside innovative engineering solutions to realize the king's ever-expanding vision. The most ambitious phase came between 1678 and 1686, when Jules Hardouin Mansart designed the spectacular Hall of Mirrors, replacing an open terrace on the garden facade. This revolutionary gallery, lined with 17 mirror-clad arches reflecting 17 windows overlooking the gardens, created a dramatic play of light, symbolizing both the king's enlightened rule and France's growing industrial prowess in manufacturing luxury goods. The Royal Chapel, the final major addition, was not completed until 1710. The cost of building Versailles was staggering, estimated at nearly half the annual tax revenue of France during some years of construction. Materials came from across France and beyond: marble from the Pyrenees, wood from French forests, and decorative elements crafted by Europe's finest artisans. Charles Lebrun directed the elaborate decorative program that unified the vast interior spaces with mythology-inspired paintings glorifying Louis XIV. When the court officially moved to Versailles on May 6, 1682, the palace became the seat of government and center of political power, housing thousands of nobles and servants in a carefully orchestrated social hierarchy. The construction represented not just architectural achievement, but a profound political statement. The Sun King had created a world that literally revolved around him, with every detail designed to enhance royal prestige. As magnificent as Louis XIV's achievement was, the palace would continue to evolve through subsequent reigns, each monarch leaving their mark on this extraordinary complex. When Louis XIV established his court at Versailles in 1682, he transformed the palace into the beating heart of French political and cultural life, a condition that would persist until the twilight of the monarchy. Each morning, the Sun King's elaborate lever rising ceremony established the ritualized etiquette that governed every aspect of court life, with proximity to the royal person carefully calibrated to reflect status and royal favor. Thousands of nobles competed for the honor of participating in these daily ceremonies, abandoning their provincial estates to orbit around the king in an endless dance of power and prestige. The formal gardens became outdoor reception rooms where the court would promenade, enjoying elaborate entertainments including music, theater, fireworks, and the famous fountain displays powered by an engineering marvel of pumps and aqueducts. Louis XIV's successors maintained Versailles as the centre of government, though each added their own distinctive touch to the palace complex. Under Louis XV, the palace interior saw significant renovations in the new Rococo style, with more intimate, luxurious spaces replacing some of the formal grandeur. The king commissioned the creation of the Opera House, completed in 1770 for the wedding celebrations of his grandson to Marie Antoinette. The young Austrian Archduchess found Versailles both magnificent and stifling, leading her to create more private retreats within the palace complex. Marie Antoinette's renovation of the Petit Trianon and her creation of a rustic hamlet where she could escape court formality revealed the tensions already building within the rigid structure of French court life. By the late 1780s, Versailles had become a symbol of royal excess, with the astronomical costs of maintaining the palace straining national finances. The final act of Versailles' role as royal residence came on October 6, 1789, when a crowd of Parisian women marched to the palace demanding bread, ultimately forcing the royal family to return to Paris. Contrary to popular belief, the palace survived the revolution relatively intact. Napoleon considered making Versailles his imperial residence, but balked at the enormous cost, choosing instead to occupy only the Grand Trianon occasionally. The Bourbon Restoration brought Louis XVIII to the throne in 1814, but he too chose to reign from Paris. It was Louis Philippe, the citizen king, who found a new purpose for the increasingly deteriorating palace. In 1837, he established the Museum of the History of France at Versailles, dedicating the palace to all the glories of France and filling its spaces with artworks that celebrated French achievements, regardless of political regime. Throughout the 19th century, Versailles continued to witness momentous historical events, including the proclamation of the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors following France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, a humiliation symbolically avenged when the Treaty of Versailles was signed in the same space in 1919. Yet despite its continued significance, the physical fabric of the palace was gradually deteriorating, with inadequate funding for maintenance allowing decay to take an increasing toll on the once splendid royal residence. By the early 1920s, the Palace of Versailles stood on the brink of catastrophe, its once brilliant splendor dimmed by decades of neglect and insufficient maintenance. The aftermath of World War I had left France financially drained, with limited resources to allocate toward cultural heritage as the nation focused on rebuilding essential infrastructure and caring for war widows and orphans. Rain seeped through deteriorating roofs, causing water damage to priceless ceiling paintings and accelerating the rot in centuries-old oak timber frames. The palace's elaborate parquet floors, masterpieces of craftsmanship installed during Louis XIV's reign, were literally collapsing in places, creating hazardous conditions for visitors. Once brilliant gilding had tarnished or flaked away entirely, while crumbling stonework threatened the structural integrity throughout the complex. The magnificent gardens had fared little better, with fountains falling into disrepair, marble statues eroding, and formal plantings overtaken by weeds. This sorry state of affairs caught the attention of American oil magnate John D. Rockefeller Jr. when he visited France in the summer of 1923, accompanying his wife Abby to a fundraising event held at the deteriorating palace. Rockefeller, the only son of Standard Oil founder John D. Rockefeller Sr., was already establishing himself as a significant philanthropist with a particular interest in historic preservation, both in America and abroad. Moved by what he witnessed, Rockefeller conceived of a bold plan to contribute to the palace's restoration. On May 3, 1924, he wrote directly to French President Raymond Poincaré, delicately offering financial assistance not as charity, but as recognition that Versailles represented a universal cultural treasure that transcended national boundaries. "I am moved to make this proposal," Rockefeller wrote, "not only because of my admiration for these great outstanding products of art, the influence of which should be continued unimpaired through the centuries, to the enrichment of the lives of succeeding generations, but also because of the admiration which I have for the people of France. President Poincaré, himself a member of the Society of Friends of Versailles since 1913 and well aware of the palace's precarious condition, gratefully accepted the Americans' proposal. To ensure proper oversight of the funds, Rockefeller established the Franco-American Committee for the Restoration of Monuments, composed of 5 distinguished members with expertise in architectural preservation. The initial donation of $1 million, approximately 20 million francs, was allocated among 3 monuments: Reims Cathedral, the Palace of Fontainebleau, and Versailles, with the latter receiving half of the total sum, 10 million francs dedicated to saving the crumbling palace. French reactions to this unprecedented foreign involvement in preserving a national treasure ranged from profound gratitude to subtle concerns about American cultural influence, though the desperate condition of the palace ultimately outweighed any reservations. Yet as architects and preservation specialists began assessing the enormous task before them, the question remained whether even this generous donation would be sufficient to reverse decades of deterioration and restore Versailles to its former glory. The restoration of Versailles began in earnest in 1925 under the direction of head architect Benjamin Chaussemiche, who wisely prioritized functional repairs over aesthetic improvements. Following Rockefeller's practical guidance, workers first addressed the palace's leaking roofs, replacing deteriorated slate with more durable lead coverings to prevent further water damage to the interior. Structural experts carefully assessed and reinforced the massive oak timber frames supporting the roofs, preserving as much of the original 17th century craftsmanship as possible while replacing rotted sections. These initial repairs, though largely invisible to casual observers, were essential in stabilizing the palace and preventing further deterioration of its priceless artistic treasures. The scope of the work was immense, requiring specialized craftspeople skilled in traditional building techniques that had nearly vanished in the industrial age. Stonemasons, woodworkers, metal crafters, and other artisans applied centuries-old methods alongside modern conservation techniques, maintaining historical authenticity while ensuring durability. By 1927, just 3 years after his initial donation, Rockefeller was so impressed by the progress that he offered an additional 40 million francs toward preserving French heritage, with 23 million earmarked specifically for Versailles. This second wave of funding allowed work to expand beyond the main palace to other elements of the estate, including the severely damaged Queen's Hamlet, the Ballroom Grove, and the Grand Trianon. The gardens gradually regained their formal splendor, with restored fountains, replanted parterres, and cleaned statuary, recapturing Le Nôtre's original vision. Rockefeller's philanthropy not only funded direct restoration work, but also catalyzed increased government support, with the French National Assembly raising its annual budget for Versailles maintenance from 4 million francs in 1924 to 5 million by 1932. In 1936, the French government officially recognized Rockefeller's extraordinary contribution by awarding him France's highest honor, the Grande Croix de la Légion d'honneur, and naming an avenue bordering the palace Rockefeller Avenue in his honor. The restoration efforts continued in the following decades, gaining renewed vigor after World War II under curator Gerald van der Kemp, who used Rockefeller's approach to attract international support. This tradition of Franco-American cooperation continues to the present day, with organizations like the American Friends of Versailles raising millions for ongoing conservation work. When devastating storms destroyed thousands of historic trees in 1999, American supporters were again among the first to contribute to replanting efforts. Modern conservation techniques now allow for more precise restorations, with digital scanning technology creating detailed records of the palace's condition. Today, Versailles stands as a symbol not only of the vision of Louis XIV and his successors, but also to the international commitment to preserving cultural heritage that John D. Rockefeller Jr. exemplified. Millions of visitors annually experience the magnificence that was nearly lost forever, many unaware that the splendor before them exists largely because an American philanthropist recognized that some cultural treasures transcend national ownership. And now, we'd love to see you in the comments. Have you been to Versailles or would like to visit? We look forward to chatting with you below. And thanks for joining us for another episode of Old Money Mansions. Cheers. Until the next time.